Welcome back to the Empowered Woman, Badass, and Unfiltered podcast. Your host, Olivia, here today, and we're talking about forging your own path with Michelle Hands. She's all the way from Leeds, UK, and she also has a podcast that's kind of badass too. So definitely, after you listen to this episode, feel her vibe, go check the links below to be all about that. You're definitely going to love what she has to offer you. Her links are also linked below as well. She Who Dares Wins is her website, also her Instagram. Check those things out. Michelle, it's an honor to have you. I want you to share your story, who you are, what you do, who you help, and how we can forge our own paths.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that kind intro. It's so nice to talk with you and your listeners. Well, yeah, so my background, 17 years in construction. I basically came out of university and went, weirdly enough, to film school in America and had this whole grandeur of being a Hollywood actress. And then just realized that I had no life experience, and that route wasn't probably the route that I should be taking at that point in time in my life. So I came back to the UK and landed a job in construction, and I started to share stories of being on site and being the only female with friends of mine. And they were like, this is crazy. These things that you're experiencing on a construction site with men is crazy. Like, and because it was all I'd known, I was like, oh, okay. So I started sharing my stories, being brutally honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly, with people online. And a lot of women were really interested in the world of construction. A lot of women also felt that they were kind of isolated in the careers that they had chosen. And so I kind of created this little community. And back then it was called This Is a Man's World. And up until about 3 or 4 years ago, it still was This Is a Man's World. And I just realized that there were so many more women out there that were in different fields that weren't in construction, that also kind of related to, my journey and what I was experiencing. And so I decided to change it to a little bit more of a positive vibe, which is where She Who Dares Wins came from. And I just thought it's a motto that I always had. As someone said to me at some point during my career, why do you do this? Because it is tough. It is a tough industry to be in. And I was just like, She Who Dares Wins. Like, it pays very good money. It is very enjoyable. It's very rewarding. And yes, you don't see many women do it. But if I am that one woman that some little girl sees when they walk past the construction site and says, oh wow, I could be an engineer, then kind of I've done a job. So that's kind of how She Who Dares Wins was born. And then I literally am still kind of in the industry part-time. I do social media content, and I'm still very much an advocate for getting more women into the industry. And I'm pretty straight talking. I will say the good, the bad, and the ugly. I talk about bad experiences, shocking experiences, because I think even though we want to get more women in, we've got to talk about the shit that happens, because quite frankly, we can't ignore it, because what's happening is women are coming into the industry and then leaving, and companies are going, well, what's happening? We're bringing women in. Why are they leaving? And my argument is because the culture is so toxic, and it's not all the time. Like, it's not a horrific place to work, but there are some really dark corners of construction that need to be changed. And so that's kind of my soapbox. That's where I sit when I talk about my career. And now that I shift into like a new area of content creation and trying to help other women, I'm really interested in this kind of like forge your own path, which is the strap line for the brand. And that is finding your own way, because I didn't have anyone to look up to when I was working in construction. So I had to forge my own path, and it was really interesting. I learned so much. And I think it's interesting if we look at it from that angle, and, if a woman's out there doing a job that they don't see other people doing, then it's really cool for them to think that, they're forging their own path. And I think with social media these days, it's really interesting how we're looking for answers. And I think sometimes maybe if we just rely a little bit on gut instinct, we'll get to where we want to be. And you can't always follow other people's paths, if that makes sense.
Michelle, thank you so much, because I already got a bunch of notes, and I'm gonna double back on a few things. I love that you wanted to be an actress. I know a few.
Yeah.
Is that something you still want to do?
So I am very interested in sharing stories and storytelling, and I realized quite early on that I didn't really have the ability, if I'm going to be honest. I didn't have the life experiences to pull into the acting side of things. And I do love entertaining. I love, that whole craft, which is why it was kind of a nice circle round that whilst I was in construction, I started making YouTube videos. So I was storytelling, but within my own world. And I learned that that's really where the passion comes from. It's not necessarily the acting, it's more the storytelling. So I dabbled in directing and producing, and ultimately it all comes down to being able to share stories and try and empower people through that and entertain at the same point.
And Michelle, you said something powerful when you were talking about being willing to find your own way and forging your own path, and this whole idea. And it's so easy to simply say, but you touching on like everybody following what other people are doing on social media. And I'm actually a big fan of Alux. It's online on YouTube. They've got like 4 million followers. It's like future billionaires of the world or whatever, but they have all these educational videos. I'm like that type of person. And they were talking about how someone didn't start playing at their best, like an athlete or something, until they started playing like themselves. And it's so important for us to really, truly hone in on who we are. And we're not going to find that on the outside. We have to find that on the inside. So really trusting that gut instinct, really going into and hearing and learning from your intuition and following that path. I think that's so important. Now I'm going to also double back because I wanted to give that its flowers. I want to double back though, because I've got my question is, what are some of those experiences? I want the tea. I want the juiciness of the experiences you deal with in that industry, because I work in food and bev, and food and bev can be very, like in the kitchen, can be very toxic. Even some of my like only one of my managers in the history of life has been extremely toxic, but I'm like, I'll have to talk to you later about that. I want to know, you tell me, what are some of those crazy experiences?
Yeah, so like I say, starting at the age of 21, pretty much, I think the first job that I was on, it was quite a shock to have a woman on site. And yeah, over the years, the comments, like, wouldn't you rather work in a makeup store than be here? Or like, are you on work experience, when I was actually like the manager at that point? And then there's the dark side. So I was working on a job where I was working with two guys who had actually, one of them had just been let free from jail time. So he'd done 15 years for manslaughter. Now fully open to everyone having the opportunity to work in whatever field, but I was a 23-year-old young woman in the middle of a field alone with this guy. And there still isn't any any awareness. Like, I was not told that I was going to be working with an ex-convict that had done murder. It wasn't just something like robbing some sweets from a corner shop. This is pretty harsh stuff. And at the time, like, looking back on it, there's been so many times when I've been at work where things could have turned quite badly, and I'm really lucky that they didn't. But I speak to a lot of women that aren't lucky, and there is sexual harassment, rape, all these things happen, and they sometimes get covered over because companies don't know how to deal with the issues, and they often move the women on rather than dealing with it head on. That's kind of the dark side of things. But the light-hearted stuff I love about the industry is that it is funny. I do love the banter side of things. I don't know if you guys use the word banter, but like, jokes is a UK term. And yeah, there's funny things. I've talked about, you could be in a portaloo on site, the portable toilets, and we have this thing in the UK where they'll turn it over, and the blue, exactly. So if someone's in there, then all the excrement, all the blue it's pretty disgusting. That stuff happens. Yeah, it's pretty awful. That stuff happens on construction sites. Like, bullying happens with the younger generation, not just women, but younger guys that are coming in. And the construction industry has one of the highest suicide rates, because it is toxic, can be toxic masculinity, and it's a very pressured job. Like, it can be very unsafe as well. So you've got highly pressured, really unsafe, and then kind of like masculinity ruling, and you can see how many people fall by the wayside. And I've seen many grown men cry on site and struggle. That's hard to see, and it's something when you're in your early 20s you're not prepared for either. So yeah, I've lightly touched on some there. I've worked with sex offenders but never been made aware of it. I've been surrounded by drug use, alcohol, all that stuff that exists, as I'm sure it does in other industries. But I just feel like an industry where there aren't other women to help support you or guide you through that, it can be a pretty dark place to be in.
Yeah, especially with, you're not working with the desk man in construction. You are working with the manly man, all right? And if people get offended, this is not the podcast for you if you got offended by manly man, because you know what I'm talking about in construction. You know, these are guys that can lift heavy things and do things. So it's extremely intimidating, especially at that young, in your 20s. And then not having them talk so badly about women, because I know how men chat, you know, just rating women and all this other stuff. And so it's like, it puts you in a sense as you're becoming who you are as a woman. It's a very isolating situation, especially if you don't have those women in that industry. So that's why it's so important that you forged your own path in that industry. And you know, I understand now even more so the message, because you're asking women to do things, to go in places that they're not necessarily expected or allowed to go into, regardless of what society says, but what they truly want to do, and letting them be aware, like, okay, you stepping into this, but you know what, you're gonna have to deal with this, this, and this. Are you really ready for that? You know? And I love that about it. I love that you touched.
It's not been easy either. So like I say, forge your own path. It's hard when you are doing that, because I had a period where I felt like I was blending in, and I changed my attitude. I changed the way that I spoke. I probably changed my values, because I wanted to blend in, because you get to a kind of a point where you sometimes go into a survival mode, and I didn't like the person that I had to be. And I think that comes with age. Like when I kind of got to my 30s, mid-30s, I started giving a shit about what people thought, and I became more aligned with who I was as a person. But it was tough, and I understand when women say that they kind of lose their identity, because sometimes it's just about survival.
You operate so different out of survival too, you know, scientifically, what your brain does, you know, and you're kind of almost on autopilot, and you kind of you get detached from your soul. And so that's a hard place to be. So I'm so happy that you were able to basically wake up and ignite that fire back in yourself when it comes to really going after what you're doing, and still keeping that creativity and showing other women that even though it's hard, you can do hard things. I love that.
Thank you.
So we've done a little background, the nitty gritty. I want to know, tell me more about what you're doing now. I love to hear what you're doing now, and then also what you're planning on doing in the future.
So now I you know, doing things like this, like sharing stories with you and talking to other women, is really important, because it's opened my eyes up to other women's experiences. And I'm very interested in talking about my career in terms of being able to help others. So I do have a lot of women kind of ask me, you know, advice, and that it's a hard thing to navigate, because again, I'm trying to say forge your own path, but I still believe that we can help each other and help lift the ladder in any industry that we're in. But for me, I started She Who Dares Wins, which is predominantly about content. It's going to be focused on the podcast and just trying to help other women. It did, during COVID, become a clothing brand, which I always had a dream of doing. And it was amazing. It took off, but then it consumed me. And I just didn't know how to handle the fashion industry, even though it's just hoodies and t-shirts. It's such a hard industry to crack, and it taught me so much about running a business, because when I ran a business before in engineering, it was just myself. So I was basically a freelancer. And making that shift was really interesting. But what it did help me to do is connect with lots of other women just around the core values that we share, which is, she who dares wins. It resonates with so many women in sport, in these amazing different careers that are out there. And that's how I've kind of landed on back of launching the next, series of season of the podcast, because there's so many women I want to speak to, and I want to learn from, and hopefully by me learning from them and sharing their stories, it goes out to the wider audience, and there'll be people that will take, little snippets that will help them in their own way of forging their own path.
What drives you?
Oh, hard question. I guess to make a change and make a difference. I'm a very social person. That's why I was I loved construction. I didn't necessarily love the work. I loved the people. So I know that sounds like a complete contradiction when I say it was hard and there were some horrible things, but ultimately you are thrown into a mixed bag of people from all walks of life. And I love that. Like, I love nothing more than chatting to people and learning their stories, which all ties back into the love of film. And I think that drives me, the connection with other people and also being able to help others.
I relate to that like crazy in the food and beverage industry. So right now, we don't have an executive chef at our location, but we're a corporate store. So they gonna have to keep us open because we're making money. So they have to continue to send all these different corporate chefs. And we're like, it's so cool because I get to meet ones from other locations. And it's almost like I feel like I'm going into battle with these people. And it's like if you meet somebody else in your let's say you're in the army and you meet somebody else in the army but from another location, and it's like, right, oh, when we fought war together, we're gonna go back our different ways, and I get to in food and bev, I get to meet people from all over the world. Like, I have somebody from Afghanistan. I have somebody that speaks Vietnamese. So he's from Vietnam. And literally we got to Google Translate. I'm so happy I live in this world where I can pull out a phone and be like, okay, this is what I'm saying in English. Can you just tell me? Mexico. I mean, of course, like Black and white people too, like Americans that I have here too, but I get to meet so many different types of people. And then the guests that come in, I get to meet them. And so I understand where you're coming from with like just the connection of people. And even with like my toxic old manager, I texted him and I said, I texted him, I was like, how are you doing? I miss being abused by you, such and such things. I have Stockholm syndrome. And because like, you can't honestly, like, he would be the type that he was a tyrant. He was a micromanager and I couldn't stand him. But I realized in that relationship, the parts of me that needed growth and development as well. Like, because I would be like, okay, I'm gonna just troll this dude. How I dealt with the toxicity was like, I'm gonna just come up with, I'm gonna be super professional in emails, and he's not gonna be able to say that I'm not professional. And it was literally like, I got to do that. It was a game. I got to play it, and now I don't. And I'm like, well, that's not fun anymore.
And isn't it? It's the hindsight when you look back at those times where you find it really difficult that actually you learn the most.
And you get so much growth out of the different experiences, the different conversations, and once you're expanded, you can't contract. And that's another reason why I love doing podcasts and learning from women like you. Like, I've never talked to a woman in the construction industry to understand like I have, but now I have that idea. And you're in the UK. Like, what? It's just so cool to me.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's amazing about the internet and social media. Whilst we can get kind of bogged down with it, ultimately, if it's used right, is incredibly powerful.
Oh my God, yes. Well, how can my listeners, myself, how can we help you grow and support you in your mission?
Just check me out on socials, join the conversation. If you relate to something, then throw a comment in there, and just share your story as well, because that's something that I'm really passionate about, is telling women that they might not feel like their story is special, but everyone's story is special and everyone has something to teach others. And I think if we can share and have the confidence to share, then it comes back twofold. So share your story if you've got a story. I mean, everyone has a story, so just start putting yourself out there.
Well, Michelle, keep having your passion and your fire. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank
I'm
you.
so grateful I got to share this space with you today. And yeah, thank you for being a guest.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Empowered Woman, Badass and Unfiltered podcast. If you found any value in this, please consider sharing and subscribing. Now go out and be a badass.